Although almanacs are typically inconspicuous publications which gain little notoriety, controversy erupted in 1793-1794 and lasted until 1810, when William Jones decided to create parody publications for Patrick Wogan's publications Grant's Almanack, the Starry Intelligence, and the Ladies Almanack. When one thinks of almanacks in the modern sense, images of little-used books with artistic covers usually crop up. One thinks of agriculture immediately, and one considers the sunrise and sunset tables, planting and growing advice, calendars, astronomical data, and the occasional crossword that is inside these publications. Almanacks from the late 18th and early 19th centuries, however, contain all of these details and a bit more. Tide tables, enigmas, quizzes, and games were not uncommon. Listings of roads, listings of fairs, event calendars, and more were often included in these almanacks. While almanacks were a useful gardening and agricultural tool, their contents extended to interest entire families and numerous audiences. For this reason, competition was fierce. Most almanacks were annual publications, which means that they were all competing for similar audiences around the same time of the year. Almanac publishers tried numerous ways to distinguish their publications and make them the go-to resources for farmers and families around Ireland. Piracy was an inevitable consequence of these battles, and it was commonplace that editors and publishers would steal each other's ideas to remain competitive. One need look no further than the Wogan versus Jones battles which occurred in Dublin between 1793 and 1810 to see what I'm talking about. The history of these three original publications is complicated enough without the parody publications, so I will begin with a brief outline of the original pre-1793 history. Nicholas Grant's publication, called simply Grant's Almanack, was in existence from at least 1782 and possibly sooner. Most of the publication's life under Grant's direction was uneventful until his death in 1783. Grant seems to have ably managed this publication, and his success produced enough of an audience to warrant the publication's continuance. In fact, Grant's influence was considerable given that many of the subsequent proprietors and even William Jones, the proprietor of the parody publication, left Grant's name on their publications. Grant seems to have established more than just an almanac. He created a brand which people trusted and consulted frequently. John Misty took over the Grant's Almanack in 1783 after Grant's death. Misty may have added his name to the publication title to make it Misty's Grant's Almanack, but it is likely that this name is just used simply to distinguish between the different periods of the paper's existence. Edward Evans's book on Irish almanac history suggests that Misty may have been Grant's son-in-law or nephew, but this information cannot be confirmed. Misty took over the publication and Grant's other business ventures around Dublin, which, by all accounts, were plentiful and branched into everything from the press to groceries. Grant's Almanack expanded to accommodate these diverse interests, containing information about the linen trade, meridians, bearings, spinners, markets, and flax prices, including much more content than the previous versions. Misty, however, did not survive his predecessor long. When he passed in 1789, Robert Jackson stepped in to fill the void that Misty left. The new Grant's Almanack, possibly referred to as Jackson's Grant's Almanack, continued to expand its reaches and influence in the Dublin area. Jackson's proprietorship saw the publishing venture become more of its own business rather than a part of the larger business structure. Editing and compiling duties were given to Andrew Barker, who was Jackson's family tutor. Barker had previously worked for Isaac Jackson on the Starry Intelligence and the Ladies Almanack in the 1780s. He was more than capable of taking over the operation, and he was chosen specifically for his mathematical background. All signs point to Grant's Almanack being strong during this period. The brand increased as the Starry Intelligence and the Ladies Almanack came under the same company umbrella, and all three publications found some degree of success despite an inevitable overlap in contents. Their contents varied just enough, however, with one publication focusing more on markets, another one on astronomy, and another one on women's interests, that they were able to survive simultaneously, even after Robert Jackson's death in 1793. With that being said, all three publications were at risk in 1793 when Jackson died. Jackson's death left a huge void in the business, and his descendants did not wish to continue the venture. Why they did not assume proprietorship of the publications is lost to history. All that is known today is that Patrick Wogan bought all three diaries, and they lived on for a while. Because almanacs are infrequently studied and the almanacs in question existed so long ago, details about each are rare. Their histories are fragmented, and we know their general contents and that they had enough support to exist simultaneously, but how large their audience was has been lost to time. In fact, it may never have been known given how scant record-keeping could have been for such marginal publications. Much of the history, such as what changes occurred under each subsequent editor and which events impacted the publications, are unavailable therefore. A researcher is often left to fill in the blanks or use imprecise language to describe the titles, which can be unfulfilling and dangerous because one may jump to conclusions. With that in mind, I will explain what is known for sure about the Starry Intelligence and the Ladies Almanack, which both lasted from the 1780s until the early 1800s. The Starry Intelligence was particularly short-lived. It is known to have existed from 1793, when Robert Jackson took over proprietary duties on top of his previous publishing duties. It is likely that the publication preceded this date and was in the Jackson family name under Isaac's governance. The Starry Intelligence was edited by Mark Morton, and it contained questions and enigmas, on top of astronomy and maybe even astrology, which was received with mixed reviews. The Starry Intelligence suffered more from stamp duties than any other publication discussed in this video. It was strong at first, but its prominence diminished throughout the 1790s. William Jones's competitive parody publication likely contributed to its demise, which finally happened in 1799. One may speculate that the audience was divided just enough that Jackson could not support the publication at the current stamp fees. The Ladies Almanack, like its Starry counterpart, likely existed before Robert Jackson took over in 1793. Isaac Jackson was likely involved in some capacity as well. Ladies, as it was commonly known, likely catered to women's interests in domestic subjects more than its relative publications did, but it also contained the usual questions, enigmas, and mathematical problems. It was a family publication which may have also been edited by Mark Morton, but this information is not as specific. It lasted until 1806, when publishing pressure and financial constraints precipitated by William Jones's parodies forced its amalgamation with Grant's Almanack to form a hybrid publication called the Grants and Ladies Almanacks. All of these details bring me to William Jones, who was a rival publisher in 1793. Jones saw an opportunity to capitalize on Jackson's death and the uncertainty which followed it. As the Jackson family were making their deal with Patrick Wogan to transfer all three publications under his proprietorship, Jones was designing his own almanacs to rival them. Specifics about why Jones did what he did are mostly unavailable, but it's possible to fill in some of these details based on the events surrounding the publication. Clearly, Jackson's three publications, Grants, Starry, and Ladies, were powerful publications in their niche. They were well known and, until 1793, had achieved strong circulations to sustain them simultaneously. Jones, therefore, likely tried to capitalize on the other publications' notoriety. Striking when Jackson's, now Wogan's, publications were most vulnerable, when they were under new ownership and still trying to maintain their prominence with their audience, was opportunistic. So when Jones's Grant's Almanack, Jones's New Ladies Almanack, and Jones's West Briton, or the Starry Interpreter, were issued, they operated from a position of strength. They were able to challenge Wogan's prominent audience by offering similar contents for a similar price. They also offered more, producing more pages on average than Wogan's publications did. Although Jones issued these titles as parodies, they operated as a business. Jones was not interested in simply producing a few numbers and then letting the publications drop. He was committed to building his own almanac empire with proper editors, ways to minimize stamp duties, and initiatives to build proper audiences. These new titles were not completed half-heartedly either, but rather they provided everything that an audience expected and wanted from an almanac. Based on how long they lasted, the approach seemed to have worked. Jones's publications lasted for over a decade and each produced a strong business venture. The shortest-lived publication was the West Briton, which lasted for 13 years. It challenged the Starry Intelligence and even outlived it. The fact that it outlived its namesake points to Jones's business ambitions. He wasn't satisfied with just being an offshoot of a popular almanac publisher. He wanted his own brand. Moreover, he was willing to do almost anything to establish his brand. Jones actually poached James Sally from Wogan's publications. Sally was offered an editorship of the West Briton and quickly accepted the position. When this publication folded, Sally took over the Joneses' Ladies publication. He held his position from 1806 until 1812. By 1810, Jones had usurped Wogan as the primary almanac publisher in Dublin. Whereas Wogan's Starry Intelligence had folded 11 years previously, and his Ladies Almanack had merged with the Grants Almanack, Jones was still running two very strong publications. Jones's New Ladies Almanack and Jones's Grants Almanack were operating well when they procured Mark Morton's services from Wogan's publishing company. Morton had become well known as the editor of Wogan's publications, and acquiring him was a huge coup for Jones. Wogan brought on Patrick Lynch to counter the loss of Morton, but 1810 was the last year that Grant's Almanack was issued. It did not go down without a fight, though, although it lost its battle decidedly. In an 1810 issue of Grant's, Wogan defamed Morton. Bitter after Morton's departure, Wogan left Morton's name on the publication. It may have been an accident, but it may have also been an opportunity to highlight Morton's betrayal. The former employee took advantage of the situation either way. He took Wogan to the courts and an infamous trial ensued. Thomas Wall provides a detailed account of the trial if you're interested. After the trial, Morton continued with Jones's publications until 1812, by which time none of Wogan's publications continued. Beyond the pure intrigue of these titles, the competition between Jones's and Wogan's publishing brands highlights how competitive even a niche market like almanacs can be. The almanacs were not simply the agricultural guides that people purchased once per year. They attracted entire families, and the most successful almanacs had large audiences. They were large business ventures which attracted fierce competition and which had few limits. Staff were poached and court battles ensued when things went awry. Entire publishing firms were built and collapsed on the almanac market, but they are little studied today. They deserve more recognition than they receive because, frankly, they are excellent case studies for anyone examining late 18th and early 19th century publishing practices. Thanks for listening.